A cold fog drifted in on a late autumn afternoon as children swarmed the playground behind Millbrook Elementary, their laughter echoing under the low gray sky. The trees, bare, their leaves scattered across damp grass, stood like silent witnesses to the lives passing beneath them. Claire Morgan waited in her battered sedan, windows fogged from her anxious breath, keeping an eye on the schoolyard gate. She'd worked a double shift at the laundromat, her uniform still smelling faintly of detergent and hope worn thin, but she was always here for Lily. No matter how tired, no matter how rough things got, Claire's day didn't really begin until she saw her daughter's face. Near the playground fence, a big brown horse stood tied to a hitching post, drawing curious stares from kids and adults alike. Bruno, the rescued Andalusian, with a coat like polished chestnut and eyes deep and soft, was Claire's other miracle. Once wild, now gentle, Bruno had become a fixture at the edge of their lives, a kind of silent guardian. That afternoon, he seemed unusually tense, his ears swiveling toward the sound of each shrill scream or shout from the kids. Suddenly, as the end-of-day bell rang, chaos erupted. Kids scattered, rushing for the exit or roughhousing in pockets. Claire's eyes found Lily, a petite, bright-eyed girl with flyaway blonde hair, moving with a group near the old pond at the edge of the lot. In an instant, a commotion broke out. Claire saw a tall girl, Savannah, the one with the too loud laugh, give Lily a hard shove. There was a scream, high and panicked, followed by a splash. "Lily!" Claire's heart stopped. She shoved the car door open, her purse tumbling to the floor, and sprinted across the yard. The world blurred, every muscle burning. Her brain screamed at her to get to her daughter, but something else was moving faster. Bruno, tied no more, had broken free. With a crack of hooves and the splintering of a wooden post, he thundered through the fence. The kids scattered, shrieking. Teachers froze, hands raised, too shocked to react. Claire saw Bruno race for the pond, his powerful legs churning mud and leaves, water spraying as he plunged right in. For a heartbeat, everything seemed suspended. Time, breath, hope itself. Then Bruno surged forward, dipping his head beneath the icy surface. He caught Lily's jacket collar gently in his teeth and pulled. Claire skidded to the pond's edge, muddy water soaking her shoes, reaching desperately for her child. Bruno hauled Lily up and out, water streaming off her body, her lips blue but her eyes flickering. Claire scooped Lily into her arms, tears and pond water running together on her face. She buried her face in Lily's hair, whispering, "I've got you, baby. I've got you." Behind her, Bruno climbed onto the bank, flanks heaving, legs bleeding from gashes where the fence had caught him. He stood trembling but quiet, his huge body blocking the wind from mother and daughter. The teachers rushed in then, confusion and concern turning quickly to something sharper. A voice cut through the chaos, a parent, red-faced and frantic. "That horse went wild. He almost trampled my boy." Others picked up the cry, their panic infecting the crowd. "He broke loose. He's out of control. He could have killed someone." Whispers snaked from mouth to mouth. "He's dangerous. We have to call animal control." Claire clung to Lily, shaking, staring at Bruno. He stood perfectly still, head lowered, a trickle of blood snaking down his leg, eyes gentle and watchful. Lily, shivering, looked up at her mother, and then at Bruno. She whispered, so soft only Claire could hear, "He's the only one who came for me." Within minutes, animal control arrived. Uniformed officers kept a wary distance, one hand on a tranquilizer gun. Teachers hurried the other children away, shielding their eyes. Claire tried to speak, her words tripping over sobs. "He saved her. He's a hero, please. He's gentle. He's never hurt anyone." But the tide had turned. A teacher pointed at a boy with a scraped elbow, Noah, whose mother was already making a scene. "That horse should never have been near the school," she shouted. "My son could have been killed." Savannah, standing behind her, nodded emphatically, her eyes flickering between Claire and the teachers. Bruno whickered softly, blood and mud streaking his coat, but didn't flinch as the officers moved in. Lily tried to run to him, but Claire held her back, arms tight around her trembling daughter. "Don't let them take him, Mom. Don't let them hurt Bruno." The officers exchanged glances, radioed in, and after a tense moment, one finally said, "We're issuing a removal order. The horse has to be taken into custody. He's a threat to public safety." Claire's world narrowed. The voices, the chaos, the pointing fingers, all of it faded as she watched them put a rope around Bruno's neck, leading him away from the only people who'd ever truly understood him. Lily sobbed in her arms, her body shaking with grief. Claire pressed her lips to her daughter's hair, her own tears falling silently. Over the din, she caught one last look from Bruno, deep, loyal, unfathomably sad. As dusk settled and the fog thickened around the empty playground, Claire stood alone with Lily in her arms, the sound of hooves and accusations ringing in her ears. A hero was being led away in chains, and all she could do was hold her daughter and pray the truth would find a way to speak. 2 days after the rescue, the world seemed colder. Not just in temperature, but in the looks Claire received as she hurried Lily up the cracked steps to their tiny, rented home. The late autumn wind whipped leaves across the yard, rattling the windows. Inside, the house felt smaller than ever, the familiar kitchen and threadbare couch now a stage for whispers and dread. Claire's phone buzzed constantly, notifications, messages, and updates that felt like tiny explosions in her pocket. After the incident, parents on social media had exploded with fury. Posts accused Bruno of rampaging, endangering dozens of children. Some called for a ban on all large animals within a mile of any school. Others dug up old gossip about Claire, sneering at her job, her single mother status, and even her dangerous choice of a rescue horse. She tried to shield Lily from the worst of it, but children at school can sense fear like blood in the water. Lily, usually so lively, now moved with a cautious inward energy. She avoided groups on the playground, sitting alone by the window in her class. Bruno's halter, his name stitched in faded gold thread, hung on the end of her bed, a silent reminder of the one friend who hadn't run away. Claire would catch her daughter tracing the letters with her finger, whispering to herself when she thought no one was listening. But the worst blow came in a thick, official envelope with the school district's crest. Claire opened it with trembling fingers. The words burned in her eyes. This letter is to notify you that, after a thorough review, the board has determined Bruno, the horse, is a threat to student safety. His presence on or near school grounds is strictly prohibited. Any further incidents may result in criminal charges. Beneath the formal language, the message was clear. Bruno wasn't just unwanted, he was dangerous, exiled, and, by extension, so was Claire's little family. Attached was a copy of a social media post from Savannah's mother, a photo of her daughter standing bravely with Noah Spence, his arm in a sling, his face pouting for the camera. The caption read, "My brave girl saved the day. Thank God for quick-thinking students. Horses don't belong at schools." It only got worse. Claire started receiving hate mail. Slips of paper stuffed under her windshield wiper. Anonymous texts. "Go back to the farm, animal lover. Should have kept your freak horse in the barn." Someone even egged their front window one night, the sticky residue impossible to fully clean away. At school, the isolation sharpened. Children whispered and pointed. Even the teachers seemed unsure how to treat Lily, their faces stretched tight with caution, like every word was a step onto thin ice. But through it all, Lily clung to one truth. She told her mother, night after night, "He's the only one who didn't run. Not even you got there first, Mom." Bruno came. Claire did her best to reassure Lily, but inside, her own hope was eroding. The small town she'd thought of as home was closing its doors one by one. She went to the school board meeting, sitting in the back with Lily, her heart pounding as accusations flew. Noah's mother recounted the events in dramatic detail, painting Bruno as a wild animal out for blood. Savannah, standing beside her, nodded with solemn conviction, describing how she'd tried to pull Lily away. But the horse came charging at us all. Claire tried to speak. She told them about the rescue, about how Bruno had never once shown aggression, how he'd saved her daughter's life. But her voice was swallowed by the murmurs, and the murmurs by the anger. A local reporter snapped her photo as she left, eyes downcast, Lily clutching her hand. The next day, another letter arrived, this one more devastating than the last. It was from her landlord, citing lease rules regarding livestock aggression. Claire's hands shook as she read, "Given recent events, I have no choice but to enforce the lease policy. You and your animals must vacate the property within 2 weeks. Failure to comply will result in legal action." Tears welled in Claire's eyes as she sat Lily down to explain. The words felt like acid on her tongue. We have to leave for a while, honey. It's not safe for Bruno here, and the landlord wants us to find somewhere else to stay." Lily's face crumpled. She didn't cry, just nodded, turning away to stare out the rain-blurred window. She pressed her nose against the glass, watching the spot where Bruno's makeshift pen stood empty. With nowhere else to go, Claire called her cousin Emma, who lived on a small, run-down farm on the outskirts of town. Emma agreed to take Bruno temporarily. She'd always liked the horse, and her kids were excited about a new animal to help care for. Still, as Claire drove Bruno out to Emma's farm, the old horse trailer rattling behind her battered sedan, a terrible silence filled the car. Lily pressed her hand against the glass the entire way, watching Bruno's dark silhouette shuffle nervously in the trailer. At the farm, Emma's kids came running, eager to see Bruno. But when the trailer ramp fell and Bruno stepped out, he didn't trot or prance. He looked back at the car, his big, liquid eyes searching the horizon. Lily ran to him, wrapping her arms around his neck, her face pressed into his mane. For a long moment, no one spoke. Bruno nudged Lily's shoulder gently, breathing her in. She pulled back, her lips trembling. "Be good, Bruno. We'll come back for you, I promise." Claire hugged her daughter tight, then led her to the car. As they pulled away, Claire glanced in the rearview mirror and saw Bruno standing perfectly still at the edge of the pasture, his head lifted, watching them disappear down the drive. Back at home, the air felt heavy and final. Their world had shrunk to a suitcase, a few bags, and the echo of hooves in the dirt. Lily barely spoke that night. She curled up on her bed, holding Bruno's halter, refusing dinner, her face turned to the wall. Claire sat beside her in the dark, wishing she could explain to her daughter why people let fear win, why a hero could become a villain overnight. But there were no answers, only the silence that settles in when a town turns its back, and the quiet, stubborn hope that maybe, somehow, love would be enough to survive it. Winter settled in early that year, casting a raw, biting cold over Millbrook. Claire found herself moving through the days in a fog, as if the outside chill had seeped into her bones. The tiny house seemed emptier with Bruno gone. Even the old radiator, clanking in the corner, couldn't fill the silence left by the absence of hoofbeats and gentle snorts from the yard. The loneliness had teeth. Claire worked late, scraping together hours at the laundromat and a new part-time cleaning job at the church. Her hands were always cracked and red from bleach in the winter air, but she pushed through, determined to provide some sense of stability for Lily. Yet, nothing felt stable anymore. For Lily, the world had closed in even tighter. She rarely left her room, except to go to school. The other kids avoided her now, whispering behind cupped hands in the hallway. She would come home and drift through the house like a ghost, her eyes dull, her laughter gone. She ate less and less, pushing food around her plate until Claire stopped trying to make favorites and just left crackers and juice on the nightstand. The first time Claire noticed something was truly wrong. It was after a night she'd returned home long after dark. She found Lily asleep on her bed, clutching a thick, braided ribbon. Only when Claire got closer did she realize the ribbon was actually a lock of Bruno's mane, tied with one of Lily's favorite blue hairbands. Her daughter was whispering in her sleep, words soft and pleading, her hands tightening around the braid like it was a lifeline. As days passed, the symptoms grew. Lily's face turned pale, her eyes ringed with shadowy bruises. She shivered even with the heat on, sometimes waking at night, drenched in cold sweat. Claire tried everything, hot chocolate, story time, promises that they'd visit Bruno soon. But Lily would only shake her head, pulling the covers higher. "He's waiting for me," she'd say, voice trembling. "He doesn't understand why I left." School called nearly every week now. "She seems distracted," Lily's teacher said over the phone, her tone tight with worry. "She doesn't talk to anyone. She won't eat lunch. We're concerned, Mrs. Morgan." Claire wanted to scream, to explain that it wasn't just the children or the rumors, but a wound much deeper, one the school couldn't see and no doctor could treat. Finally, Claire took Lily to their family physician. The waiting room was stifling, filled with coughing children and tired parents scrolling their phones. When the doctor finally examined Lily, she frowned. "There's no fever, no infection, no clear medical cause. Are you sure nothing happened at home?" Claire shook her head, frustration welling up. "It's not home, it's—" But how could she explain it? How do you tell a doctor your child's heart is breaking from losing a horse, a friend? Because the world refused to understand. That night, Claire watched Lily sleep, her small hands tangled in Bruno's mane. The room was filled with quiet sounds, the radiator's faint groan, the wind scraping dead leaves against the window, in Lily's shallow breaths. At the edge of sleep, Claire heard her daughter whisper again, "I miss you, Bruno. I need you." Miles away, on Emma's farm, Bruno was struggling too. Emma called every few days with updates, each one grimmer than the last. "He barely eats," she told Claire. "He stands at the far end of the pasture every evening, staring at the road. Sometimes he lets my girls pet him. But mostly he just waits. He's not himself." Emma tried to make light of it, but Claire heard the worry underneath. The connection between Lily and Bruno was deeper than anyone realized. Each sunset, Bruno would stand by the gate, his body still and tense, as if willing Lily to appear. Emma's husband rigged extra fencing to keep him from wandering, but Bruno grew more restless by the day, pacing the perimeter, ignoring the hay and treats he once loved. The isolation for both Lily and Bruno was a kind of shared sickness, two souls wounded by the same injustice. Claire tried to bridge the gap, driving out to the farm whenever she could, but the visits only seemed to make things worse. Each time they left, Bruno would whinny desperately, and Lily would dissolve into tears, sobbing into Claire's shoulder, her body racked with guilt. "He thinks I left him, Mom. He thinks I didn't fight for him." One icy morning, after another sleepless night, Claire stood in the kitchen, brewing coffee, when she heard a loud crash. She raced down the hall, heart pounding. Lily had fainted in the bathroom, her legs folded awkwardly beneath her. For a terrifying moment, Claire thought her daughter wasn't breathing. She scooped Lily into her arms, feeling the alarming weightlessness, like picking up a pile of blankets instead of a child. Claire rushed her to the ER, adrenaline making everything feel sharp and surreal. The hospital was a blur of forms, questions, and waiting rooms that smelled of antiseptic and hopelessness. Doctors ran tests, drew blood, checked for everything from flu to food poisoning to rare immune disorders. Nothing came back abnormal. "She's severely fatigued," a pediatrician finally said, "but there's no physical reason for her collapse." Sometimes children, especially after trauma, withdraw in ways we can't see or easily fix. Claire sat by Lily's hospital bed, watching monitors blink and beep, feeling the weight of every decision. Had she done this by bringing Bruno into their lives? By not fighting harder for him to stay? She stroked Lily's hair and whispered, "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm not leaving you." But as night fell and the wind howled outside the hospital window, Claire realized something chilling. This wasn't just a broken heart. It was a bond cut too abruptly, a piece of each child, human and animal, left behind, struggling in the cold. Back at Emma's farm, Bruno grew more agitated with each passing day. He stopped eating entirely, ignoring the bales of hay Emma placed by the fence. Each night, he stood vigil at the pasture gate, his breath rising in white clouds, waiting for the family he'd lost. And as the winter deepened, the two friends, one little girl in a hospital bed, one lonely horse on a frozen farm, faded further from the world, connected only by longing and the desperate hope that someone, somehow, would help them find each other again. The light in room 4B was always dim, filtered through beige curtains meant to be comforting, but which instead made everything look faded and distant, as if the world itself was receding from the small bed at the center of the room. Machines beeped softly. Shadows crept across the walls as the late December sun struggled through another gray afternoon. Claire sat at Lily's bedside, her hands clenched around a styrofoam cup of stale hospital coffee. She couldn't remember the last time she'd truly slept. Her days and nights blended into one endless vigil, a cycle of soft reassurances to Lily and hollow reassurances to herself. Nurses came and went, checking vitals, adjusting blankets, offering quiet sympathy. Claire noticed how they'd started lowering their voices as they entered, as if afraid to disturb a delicate balance. Doctors had run test after test: blood work, Connecticut scans, heart monitors, consultations with specialists from the city. All the results came back the same. Nothing was physically wrong with Lily. Her body is healthy, one pediatrician explained gently, but her mind, she's withdrawn, almost as if she's trying to disappear. We sometimes see this in children after a traumatic loss or sudden separation. What she needs now isn't more medicine. She needs her heart put back together. It felt like a condemnation, but also a cruel joke. How was Claire supposed to heal her daughter's heart when every door in this town had slammed shut? How could she bring back the one friend Lily needed when the world insisted on calling him a monster? Lily barely spoke. When she did, her words were distant, drifting out on a shallow breath. Sometimes she mumbled to the ribbon of Bruno's mane that she kept hidden under her pillow, whispering secrets or apologies. Sometimes she just stared at the ceiling, lips moving in silent conversation with someone Claire could not see. Claire tried everything to coax her back: stories, games, promises of trips to the zoo, or new art supplies. But nothing reached her. Each morning, Claire's hope crumbled a little further. She watched her daughter shrink into herself, her energy leaching away day by day. The nurses started bringing in a therapy dog, a sweet golden retriever named Murphy, but Lily only turned her head to the wall. "Not Bruno," she whispered. "Not the same." One particularly cold night, when the world outside was nothing but wind and ice, Claire leaned in close, brushing damp hair from Lily's forehead. "I'm so sorry, baby," she murmured, her voice catching. "I didn't want to take him away. I thought I was keeping you safe, but it feels like I took away your heart instead." A tear slipped down Claire's cheek and fell onto the back of Lily's hand. Lily didn't move, but Claire thought she saw the smallest flicker of response, a tightening of Lily's fingers, a tremor at the edge of her mouth. Hope flared, then sputtered out as the moment passed. At the same time, miles away on Emma's windswept farm, Bruno's world was shrinking as well. He'd grown thin, his ribs showing beneath a winter coat rough from neglect. The other horses avoided him. Bruno, once gentle and watchful, was now restless, pacing the fence line with increasing agitation. Emma's calls became more urgent. "He tried to break the gate again last night," she said, worry etched in her voice. "He stands out there all evening, staring down the road. He's going to hurt himself, Claire. I've never seen an animal pine like this. It's like he's waiting for something, or someone, and he just won't give up." The connection between Lily and Bruno seemed to pulse across the miles, an invisible tether growing more desperate with every day apart. On Christmas Eve, after another day of tests and another night of empty hope, Claire sat alone by the window, in room 4B, looking out over the snowy parking lot below. Her mind replayed the events over and over, what she should have done, what she might still do. Then, deep in the night, Emma called again, this time her voice breathless with panic. "He's gone, Claire. Bruno's gone. He broke through the paddock, snapped the fence like it was nothing. I don't know where he went. We've been out looking, but there's no sign. I'm so sorry." Claire's mind raced, heart pounding as she imagined Bruno out there, wild and alone, in the freezing darkness. Was he searching for Lily? Did he know how much she needed him? It seemed impossible, and yet, in her bones, Claire felt it was true. The next morning, the hospital was full of frantic energy. Nurses whispered about the missing horse, a viral post already spreading through town. The local news station replayed shaky cell phone footage of a brown horse galloping down a snow-covered lane. Some people thought it was a threat. Others called it a miracle. Claire barely heard them. All she could do was sit by Lily's bed, holding her hand, whispering over and over, "He's coming, baby. I know he is. Just hold on. But Lily's condition worsened. She slipped into a deep, unresponsive sleep, her skin cold to the touch. Monitors beeped warningly as her heart rate slowed. The doctors conferred outside the door, faces grave, words muffled but urgent. It's grief-induced withdrawal, one said. We need to prepare for the possibility that she may not wake up. In the darkness of room 4B, with the world closing in, Claire pressed her lips to Lily's forehead and made a silent promise. She would bring Bruno back, no matter what it took, because in the quiet heart of her daughter, in the wild heart of a horse lost in the snow, there was a story that wasn't finished yet, a story that demanded to be told, in a bond that would not be broken by the cold judgment of a fearful world. As dusk descended again, the wind rattled the hospital windows, and somewhere, out there in the frozen wild, a horse ran on and on, carrying with him the hope of a child, the love of a mother, and the chance for redemption for them all. The morning after Christmas dawned brittle and blue, with frost glittering on empty roads and bare trees stretching shadows across the land. For the first time in weeks, hope and fear churned together in Claire's chest as she stared out the window of room 4B, clutching her phone as if it were a lifeline. Bruno was gone, truly gone, out there somewhere in the frozen world, running loose, and no one knew where. Emma's farm was a flurry of boot prints and worried voices. Tracks in the snow led to the edge of the woods, then disappeared into a tangle of blackberry brambles. Emma's husband followed them as far as he could, but Bruno moved like a spirit, swift, determined, and silent except for the distant thunder of hooves echoing through the trees. Word spread quickly. Sightings came in by phone and Facebook post. Brown horse seen near the railroad tracks. Spotted at Miller's Creek, heading west. And soon, the whole town was buzzing, a swirl of concern, ridicule, and secret longing for a miracle. Bruno ran as if the cold couldn't touch him, as if the ache in his heart and the wounds on his legs didn't matter. Hunger gnawed at his belly, and the bite of icy air stung his eyes, but something deeper than instinct pushed him forward. He crossed open fields crusted with snow, slid down embankments, and leapt over fallen logs and frozen ditches. He was a flash of brown against white, his mane tangled with frost, and his breath hanging in clouds as he galloped on. He skirted small towns and hidden back roads, careful to avoid barking dogs and the occasional car that slowed in shock at the sight of a horse running free. More than once, he startled a flock of crows into the air or drew wary glances from deer in the thickets. But he never stopped for long. When he tired, he rested under thick pines, listening to distant sounds, trucks rumbling, trains whistling, the quiet hush of falling snow. And every time he closed his eyes, he dreamed of Lily, her laughter, her gentle hands, her voice calling his name across the yard. One afternoon, as clouds gathered for another storm, Bruno found himself on the shoulder of a deserted highway, limping but refusing to give in. The wound on his leg from the paddock fence was swollen and caked with mud, but he pressed on, his mind fixed on a single purpose. He paused near a rest stop, head hanging, when the low growl of a motorcycle broke the silence. Elijah, a trucker with a battered leather jacket and a kind face, was filling up at the gas pump. He froze mid-sip of coffee when he saw the horse standing by the guardrail. It took him only a moment to connect the dots. He'd seen the viral posts all morning. Brown Andalusian, missing. Answering to Bruno. Belongs to sick little girl at Millbrook. Without a second thought, Elijah pocketed his phone and approached slowly, hands raised in peace. Hey, buddy, you lost? Elijah spoke softly, the way you'd approach a skittish dog or a hurting child. Bruno eyed him, one ear flicking, but didn't bolt. Maybe it was exhaustion. Or maybe even animals know when someone means well. Elijah studied the horse's wounds, shaking his head. You got guts, big guy. You need help. Remembering the video, Elijah hit record on his phone and spoke directly to the camera. If anyone's missing a brown horse, he's here, off Highway 12, following my bike. Then he set his coffee on the curb, mounted his motorcycle, and drove slowly down the shoulder, glancing back every few seconds to make sure Bruno was following. It was an odd, slow-motion parade. Elijah rumbling ahead on two wheels, Bruno limping after him, pausing only when the pain grew too much or a horn honked in the distance. Elijah kept talking, encouraging, as if the horse could really understand. "Come on, Bruno. Not much farther now. You got this. You're a good boy." Meanwhile, back in the hospital, Claire sat rigid beside Lily, phone clutched tight, scrolling through notifications. Then a new video popped up, the thumbnail blurry but unmistakable. Elijah, face wind-chapped, pointing his camera at Bruno, snow swirling around them both. "Brown horse, heading towards St. Agnes Chapel," he said. "Somebody tell that family. I think he's trying to get home." Claire's heart stopped. St. Agnes Chapel, the old stone church near the river, just outside town. It was where she'd planned to hold Lily's funeral, should the worst come. The weight of that possibility pressed in on her, suffocating, but for the first time in days, there was a sliver of something else, purpose. As she fumbled for her keys, her phone rang. It was Emma, her voice trembling with excitement. "Did you see the video? Claire, he's headed for the chapel. What if he's coming for Lily?" Claire ran through the halls, not caring about the startled nurses or the stares from doctors. She burst into the cold, her breath billowing, fumbling with the ignition, willing her battered sedan to start. All the while, she replayed the message in her mind. Brown horse, heading towards St. Agnes Chapel. The roads were slick and treacherous. Snow fell in wild sideways bursts. But Claire pushed on, knuckles white on the steering wheel. She barely saw the traffic lights or the empty parking lots, only the image of Bruno, bleeding, exhausted, but refusing to stop. At the same time, in the chapel, preparations for Lily's funeral were quietly underway. Friends and family, wrapped in coats and grief, drifted through the sanctuary, unsure if they were saying goodbye or holding on to hope. The old priest lit candles and arranged lilies on the altar, the faint scent drifting through the air. Outside, Elijah watched Bruno slow to a walk, nostrils flaring as they approached the chapel gates. He patted the horse's neck, murmured encouragement, and watched as Bruno, driven by something no human could understand, limped through the iron archway and into the snowy courtyard. Claire's car skidded to a halt in front of the chapel just as Elijah shouted for help. "He's here! Someone get the family! He made it!" Inside the church, a hush fell as the doors burst open and the battered, bleeding horse stumbled in, snow swirling around his legs, eyes wild but searching. There were gasps, shouts, then stunned silence as Bruno, trembling and mud-streaked, moved straight toward the altar, toward Lily. At that moment, time seemed to stop. The impossible had happened, against all odds, through winter's cruelty and a town's coldness. Bruno had found his way back, not just to a place, but to the heart of the child who needed him most. And as the chapel filled with gasps and prayers, one thing was clear to everyone present: love, loyalty, and the stubborn will to save a life could move even the heaviest hearts and could carry a wounded soul farther than anyone dared believe. Snow battered the stained glass windows of St. Agnes Chapel, turning the world outside into a blur of white and gray. Inside, the air was heavy, filled with the low hum of whispers, the soft rustle of coat sleeves, the hush of mourning. The organ stood silent. Candles flickered on the altar, their flames wavering in the draft that followed the old oak doors creaking open. Most of those gathered sat somber and stunned, unsure if this was a funeral or a pause before something unthinkable. The hush was broken by the sound of hooves, first distant, then echoing closer across the old stone tiles. Bruno, battered and bleeding, forced himself through the open doors, nostrils flaring, sides heaving from the desperate journey. He looked like a vision out of a fable. Half ghost, half warrior, caked in mud and blood but moving with singular purpose. People gasped, some rising in alarm, others frozen by disbelief. Elijah, snow still melting in his beard, stood just behind the horse, hands raised, as if guiding a miracle into the room. "He came all this way for her," he breathed to anyone who would listen. At the front of the chapel, Lily lay in a small white casket, her skin so pale she almost looked like a statue. Lips blue, hair carefully brushed and arranged by nurses who didn't know if it was a kindness or a farewell. The priest, who had seen many strange things in his decades at St. Agnes, crossed himself and whispered a prayer, unsure if this was madness, grace, or something more. Claire, breathless, cheeks raw from crying in the cold, burst through the side door just as Bruno made his way up the aisle. "Bruno!" she cried, her voice shattering the tension in the room. She dropped to her knees on the stone floor, arms wide, sobs racking her frame. But Bruno hardly paused. He moved directly toward Lily, trembling but steady, his eyes fixed on the small, still figure before him. Everyone watched, paralyzed, as Bruno lowered his big head and pressed his muzzle to Lily's chest. For a moment, nothing happened, just the steady rise and fall of Bruno's breath, the ragged sounds of his exhaustion. Then, gently, Bruno lifted a heavy hoof and tapped it against the white of the casket, as if demanding that the world pay attention. Gasps rang out. Claire covered her mouth. The priest took a step back, and from the back row, a retired field medic named Mr. Daly, brought by his granddaughter to pay respects, pushed forward, suddenly alert. "Wait!" he called out, his old voice cutting through the confusion. He stared at Lily, at the faintest flutter of her lashes, then at Bruno, and back again. "She's not gone. She's hypothermic, not dead. I've seen it before. Sometimes the pulse is so faint you can't find it, but she's not gone yet." A wave of disbelief swept through the chapel. Claire scrambled to the casket, fumbling for Lily's wrist, then for her neck. Mr. Daly joined her, hands steady as he bent low, pressing his ear to Lily's chest. "Call an ambulance," he barked. "Now!" Several people leapt into action. Elijah dialed 911. The priest barked orders for warm blankets. Others cleared space on the floor. Claire barely noticed the swirl of motion around her. All she could see was Bruno, standing over Lily like a sentry, blood dripping from his wounds onto the chapel floor, eyes never leaving the child who'd been his world. Working quickly, Mr. Daly and Claire lifted Lily from the casket and laid her on a blanket, beginning chest compressions and mouth-to-mouth. "Come on, sweetheart. Come on," Claire begged, her voice raw, tears streaming down her cheeks. Bruno nickered softly, pushing his muzzle against Lily's hand, refusing to back away. Minutes felt like hours. The only sounds were the desperate instructions of the old medic, Claire's whispered prayers, and the labored breathing of a horse who should have collapsed from pain, but would not leave. When Lily's eyes fluttered, just for an instant, someone shouted. Hope surged. The paramedics arrived then, bursting through the doors with gear and urgency, sweeping Lily onto a stretcher, wrapping her in heat blankets, checking vitals. One paramedic, a young woman with steady hands and a kind face, looked up in wonder. Her heart's beating. It's weak, but it's there. She's cold, not gone. As the ambulance sped away, Claire stood outside the chapel, the cold forgotten, her hands pressed to her lips. Bruno, now surrounded by stunned mourners, watched the ambulance's red lights fade into the swirling snow. Elijah threw his jacket over the horse's back, stroking his neck with awe. "You did it, boy. You did what nobody else could." Inside the chapel, the conversation shifted from sorrow to wonder. Old grievances, whispers of fear, judgment, accusations, were forgotten in the face of what everyone had witnessed. For some, it was a miracle. For others, a lesson in loyalty and the strange, undeniable power of animal instinct. Claire, shivering but alive with new hope, knelt in the snow beside Bruno and wrapped her arms around his thick neck. "Thank you," she whispered, pressing her face to his mane. "Thank you for bringing her back to me." Tears of gratitude mixed with blood and sweat on the horse's shoulder, and for the first time in weeks, Claire felt a sliver of warmth spread through her chest. As word of the event spread, the old priest stood at the altar and looked out over his shaken congregation. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "the ones we fear are the ones who save us. And sometimes the greatest love speaks without a word." That night, as snow buried the chapel and the town, Bruno rested in the rectory barn, tended by Elijah and a few volunteers who had witnessed enough to want to help. Claire spent the night at Lily's side in the hospital, hope and anxiety coiling together as they waited for signs that Lily would truly return. But as dawn broke over Millbrook, for the first time, the town's cold suspicion began to thaw. People who had once whispered dangerous and out of control now whispered miracle and brave. And at the center of it all, battered but unbowed, was a horse whose heart had proved bigger than anyone could have imagined. The world inside the intensive care unit seemed to move at a different speed, a mixture of frantic motion and suspended time. Fluorescent lights buzzed above stark white floors, and machines hummed with cold precision, tracking each fragile beat of Lily's heart. Claire never left her daughter's side, not even to eat or rest. She watched every tremor of Lily's eyelashes, every faint rise and fall of her chest, as though her own willpower could anchor her daughter to this world. Doctors and nurses moved in and out with practiced urgency, consulting charts and adjusting IV drips, always with the same cautious words. "We're doing everything we can." The hypothermia put her in a coma, but we're seeing signs of brain activity. We just have to wait and see. Each word was a double-edged sword, hope laced with uncertainty, comfort edged with the possibility of loss. Claire's mind replayed the wild, desperate scene in St. Agnes Chapel, Bruno's battered body pushing through snow and stone, his big head nudging Lily's chest, the miracle of Mr. Daly's sudden intervention. The memory seemed both impossible and utterly real. She clung to it as proof that Lily wasn't gone. Not really, not while the bond between girl and horse still shimmered, invisible but alive. Every few hours a nurse would gently try to coax Claire to the family room, urging her to rest or at least have a cup of tea. Claire would shake her head, refusing to leave Lily for even a second. The only comfort she accepted was Bruno's mane, now woven into a soft braid that she kept wrapped around Lily's small fist. She whispered to her daughter stories of their better days, promises that Bruno was safe, that home was waiting for her, that the world could be kind again. If only she'd come back. The staff was quietly in awe. Bruno's story had already spread through the hospital, doctors trading rumors at the nurses' station, orderlies checking the news on their phones. One night, Claire overheard a nurse whisper, "That horse, it's like he knew before anyone else did." Another replied, "Sometimes instinct knows what medicine misses." The hospital chaplain stopped by to pray for Lily, and as she finished her gentle blessing, she looked Claire in the eye and said, "Love calls to love. Sometimes that's stronger than anything else." Outside, the community buzzed with news. Local TV ran segments on the miracle at St. Agnes, showing clips of Bruno limping into the chapel. The phone at the front desk rang with strangers' prayers and donations. Old judgments began to dissolve in the face of what everyone had witnessed, a bond that defied explanation, a love that refused to die. Yet under all this hope, guilt festered in the places where fear and misunderstanding had once taken root. Savannah, the girl who had pushed Lily, watched the coverage alone in her room, her hands shaking. Her mother kept making excuses to reporters. "My daughter was just trying to help." But Savannah could hear the lie echo every time she closed her eyes. Her dreams were haunted by Lily's scream and the thunder of Bruno's hooves, and when she tried to talk about it, her mother always cut her off. "It's over, honey. Just let it go." But the truth refused to be buried. The day after Lily was admitted, Savannah came to the hospital, clutching a card she'd made herself. It was clumsy, drawn in colored pencil, with a horse on the front and "I'm sorry" written inside. She stood outside the ICU doors for almost an hour, unable to go in, then finally handed it to the nurse and fled down the hall. Inside the ICU, Claire opened the card and read it aloud to Lily. "She says she's sorry. She says you were brave." For the first time in days, Claire thought she saw the hint of a smile flicker at the edge of Lily's mouth. It was gone in a second, but it was enough to ignite a new resolve in Claire's heart. Meanwhile, the medical team ran another round of tests. The EEG showed flickers of improvement, brain activity that hinted at consciousness fighting to break through the haze. On the third night, Lily's fingers twitched around the braid of Bruno's mane. Claire gasped, calling for the nurse. The staff crowded around as Lily's eyelids fluttered, her breathing deepening. A doctor squeezed Claire's shoulder. "She's fighting her way back." That same night, as if sensing the change in the air, Bruno grew restless in his borrowed stall at the rectory barn. Elijah and Emma visited often, feeding him apples and brushing the tangles from his coat. He paced the straw, occasionally tossing his head toward the hospital, as if he knew that something important was happening just a mile away. At dawn, as snow turned to rain and the first hints of light crept through the clouds, Lily's eyes finally opened. Claire's cry brought nurses running, and for a long, wondrous moment, Lily just stared, unblinking, confused, then slowly focusing on her mother's face. "Mom?" she croaked, her voice barely there. "Where's Bruno?" Claire laughed and sobbed all at once, clutching Lily's hand, repeating, "He's safe. He's waiting for you, sweetheart. He never gave up. Not for a second." The doctors confirmed the impossible. Lily had survived a hypothermic coma, her pulse too faint to register on any monitor. They marveled at Bruno's role in the story, admitting that his instincts had done what no machine could. As news spread, the hospital filled with murmurs of awe and gratitude. Bruno, once accused of being dangerous, was now seen as the hero he'd always been. But the biggest surprise came later that afternoon, as Savannah, her guilt finally outweighing her fear, walked into the room with her mother by her side. Tears ran down her cheeks as she blurted out the truth to everyone present. "It was me. I pushed Lily. Bruno saved her. He's not bad. He's the bravest one of all. I'm so sorry." There was a hush, then murmurs, then something like forgiveness stirring in the air. Lily managed a weak smile and squeezed Savannah's hand. "Thank you for telling the truth," she whispered. In that moment, the past began to lift, and a new story started to unfold, one where love, instinct, and courage could outshine even the darkest mistake. It was strange how quickly the town could change. Where once cold stares and harsh whispers had followed Claire and Lily through every grocery aisle and neighborhood street, a slow, halting warmth began to rise in their place. People were talking again, not in secret but out in the open. At the bakery, in the pews at church, on the sidewalk outside Millbrook Elementary. The question on everyone's lips wasn't, "Is that the family with the dangerous horse?" anymore. Instead, it was, "How's Lily? How's Bruno? Is there anything we can do?" It started with Savannah's confession. News of her apology and the truth about the pond spread like wildfire. For the first time, the real story, the bravery, the bond, the cost of judgment came out in the open. Savannah and her mother stood before the school board, tears on both their faces, and told everyone what really happened. "I pushed her," Savannah said, her voice shaking but clear. "Bruno was only trying to save her. I was scared, but I know now. He was never the bad one." There were gasps in the audience. Some parents broke down in tears. Noah's mother, who had been Bruno's loudest accuser, hung her head, unable to meet Claire's eyes. The school board, once so eager to cast blame, grew suddenly quiet, then voted to retract the letter that had branded Bruno a threat to student safety. They issued a public apology to Claire, Lily, and, most incredibly, to Bruno himself. Claire felt relief, but it was laced with exhaustion and sorrow for what had been lost. She stood with Lily, holding her hand tightly as the board chair read the apology aloud in front of the community. Lily looked up at her mother, still pale and thin, but with a spark in her eyes that hadn't been there for weeks. "Can I see him soon, Mom?" she whispered. "You will," Claire promised, blinking back tears. It wasn't just words that changed. The town decided to act. The superintendent announced a new set of safety and anti-bullying policies, not just for the schoolyard, but for every corner of the district. Teachers and students went through workshops. There were new assemblies, guest speakers, open forums, each one urging kids to speak up for the vulnerable, to check the facts before jumping to judgment, to remember that courage sometimes comes with a mane and 4 hooves. Meanwhile, Claire's landlord, perhaps embarrassed by all the news coverage, or perhaps moved by the story like everyone else, rescinded the eviction notice. "You and your family can stay," he said, voice gruff with discomfort. "And Bruno, too, as long as he's part of the therapy program." Claire shook his hand with relief, her gratitude so immense she could barely get the words out. But the most beautiful moment came when Savannah appeared at Claire and Lily's door, clutching a homemade card and a single white lily. Her voice trembled as she handed it over. "I'm sorry. I hope you can forgive me. And thank you for being braver than me." Lily hugged her fiercely, and they both cried, real tears, cleansing and honest. Bruno became more than just a hero. As Lily recovered, the school invited him back for a special assembly. The gym was filled to bursting, students, teachers, families, even reporters with cameras and notepads. Claire led Bruno into the room, his coat shining, wounds healing but visible, a living reminder of everything that had happened. The crowd erupted into applause, not the hesitant, nervous kind of before, but thunderous, grateful, joyful. Principal Rivers, who had once signed the order for Bruno's removal, stepped up to the microphone, voice thick with emotion. "We all learned something this winter, about kindness, about truth, about the danger of fear, and the power of second chances. And about how, sometimes, our greatest teachers walk on four legs." That day, the school district officially named Bruno their community therapy horse. He would visit classrooms, playgrounds, and even the local hospital, bringing comfort to kids who were hurting. Kids who, like Lily, needed someone to see them, to stand up for them, to rescue them in ways big and small. Volunteers from all over town signed up to help. A local vet offered his services for free, tending Bruno's injuries and giving talks about animal therapy. The PTA organized a fundraiser, raising enough money to build a proper shelter and fence for Bruno at Claire's home. The weeks that followed were a blur of gratitude and healing. Claire received letters and casseroles from people she barely knew. Neighbors who had once ignored her now waved from their porches and stopped to chat. Lily returned to school, nervous at first but soon surrounded by friends, some old, some new, who wanted to sit with her at lunch or walk her home. The teachers checked in daily, and Principal Rivers even arranged for Lily to help with Bruno's visits, letting her stand at the front of the classroom, hand on Bruno's halter, as she told their story to kids who listened with shining eyes. One morning, Savannah arrived at school holding Lily's hand, the two girls standing together as the principal announced, "From today, no child in this school eats alone. No one gets left behind." There was an unspoken promise in that room. Never again would they let fear or rumor take the place of truth. As the community's attitude shifted, Claire discovered a file that had been buried in her inbox during the chaos, a certification that Bruno had once completed a program in equine-assisted therapy before she'd adopted him. She brought the document to the next town meeting, presenting it to the mayor and school officials. "Bruno wasn't just being brave," she said, her voice strong. "He was trained for this. He was always meant to help." The town council voted unanimously to create a new equine therapy center with Bruno as its first official ambassador. They named it the Bruno Project, a place where children could come to heal, to find comfort and friendship, to learn about animals, and, more importantly, about themselves. On the center's opening day, Claire watched from the edge of the crowd as Lily, in her best dress, led Bruno around the arena. She spoke shyly into the microphone. "Bruno saved my life, not just from the pond, but from being alone. I hope he can help other kids feel seen too." The applause was thunderous. Claire wiped away tears, not just of relief, but of awe. She realized that while the town's coldness had nearly broken them, it was their courage, her daughters, her horses, and yes, even her own, that had sparked a transformation nobody could have expected. And as the sun set on Millbrook, the town stood together in the soft evening light, changed and connected in ways that would last far longer than winter. Spring arrived in Millbrook with a sense of renewal, both in the blossoming trees and in the hearts of its people. The sting of winter's mistakes had faded, replaced with the hum of new beginnings. For the first time in months, Claire felt she could breathe without bracing for a blow. Bruno, too, had transformed. His coat gleamed, his wounds nearly vanished, and there was a spring in his step that even the children noticed when he trotted across the playground or bowed his head to meet the youngest at eye level. But the journey wasn't over. Not for Claire, Not for Lily, not for Bruno. They were invited to present their story at the Regional Animal Therapy Summit, an annual gathering of specialists, teachers, and advocates who believed in the healing power of animals. Claire hesitated at first. Public speaking was not her gift, and the memory of the town's cold judgment was still raw. But Lily wanted to go, and Bruno was now a symbol of hope for more than just their small town. The day of the summit was bright and bustling. In the large conference hall, posters about therapy dogs and equine counseling decorated every wall. People came from cities and rural communities alike, sharing stories of breakthroughs, recoveries, and hard-won second chances. When it was their turn, Claire, Lily, and Bruno took the stage, hearts pounding. Claire looked out at the crowd, gripping the microphone. She could see the faces of professionals, skeptical and curious, some who had likely heard only the viral rumors but not the truth. She cleared her throat, her voice steadying as she began. My name is Claire Morgan. I stand before you today because of a horse many people once called dangerous, reckless, even a monster. I want to tell you what really happened and what we learned when the world chose fear over understanding. As she spoke, she shared the story, the rescue at the pond, the panic that followed, the judgment that swept through their town. She described the night Lily collapsed, the hopelessness in the hospital, and the impossible journey that brought Bruno to the chapel, where instinct did what medicine could not. She spoke not just of what happened, but of what it felt like. The sting of being misjudged, the pain of being unseen, the terror of nearly losing a child, not to violence, but to heartbreak and misunderstanding. Lily took the microphone next, small but brave. She told the audience, Bruno wasn't reckless. He was right. He was my friend when I didn't have any. When I was in trouble, he didn't wait to be asked. He just knew. Her voice quivered, but she pressed on. Sometimes people are too scared to help, but Bruno wasn't. He saved me. There were tears in the audience. A teacher stood up and said, How can we help more kids like Lily? How can we make sure we never mistake a friend for a threat again? A retired counselor stepped to the front and shared, We must learn to listen, not just with our ears, but with our hearts. Too often we miss the quiet calls for help because they don't sound the way we expect. At the end of their talk, Claire knelt beside Bruno, who had stood quietly, head high, through the entire presentation. Lily held his halter, and the horse bowed gently before her on stage, a gesture so deliberate, so humble, it brought the crowd to its feet in applause. For the rest of the summit, people crowded around to ask questions, to thank them, to share their own stories. Claire met a mother whose son wouldn't speak until he met a therapy horse, a principal who wanted to start a program just like Millbrook's, and volunteers from animal shelters inspired by Bruno's second chance. As the day drew to a close, the organizers presented Bruno with a blue ribbon and a plaque that read, For courage, instinct, and loyalty, Bruno, the heart of Millbrook. The mayor, who had once doubted, now shook Claire's hand, promising continued support for the therapy center and outreach programs. That evening, back at home, Claire, Lily, and Bruno walked together beneath the budding trees. The air was sweet with the scent of new grass, and laughter drifted from windows left open to the warm breeze. Lily giggled as Bruno nudged her pockets for treats, and for the first time in a long while, Claire felt at peace. Sitting on the porch, as the sky faded from gold to blue, Claire reflected on everything they'd endured, the isolation, the cruelty, the unlikely redemption. She turned to Lily, her voice gentle. What do you think people learned from all this? Lily thought for a moment, then said, that being scared is okay. But you can't let it make you mean. And that sometimes the bravest ones aren't loud or strong. They're just the ones who stay when everyone else leaves. Claire smiled, knowing her daughter understood more than most grown-ups ever would. That weekend, the therapy center held its first open house. Families from all over the county came to visit, some bringing children with invisible wounds, grief, anxiety, loneliness. Bruno greeted them all, nuzzling shy hands and standing steady while nervous kids leaned against him, letting their fear dissolve into his warmth. During a break, Claire was asked to sum up what she'd learned. She stood beneath the new sign, the Bruno Foundation, where every voice matters, and said, "We all make mistakes. We all judge too quickly or out of fear. But loyalty, love, and a willingness to listen can heal wounds deeper than any we can see." Bruno showed us what real courage looks like, and he taught us the cost of letting fear blind us to kindness. As the sun set behind the stables, Bruno lowered his head and nudged Lily close, as if to say, "I'm still here. I always will be." In that golden light, surrounded by the friends they'd gained and the lessons they'd learned, it was clear that the truest measure of love is loyalty. Steady, unwavering, and sometimes silent, but always strong enough to bring you home. A new semester began at Millbrook, bringing with it longer days, brighter skies, and a hope that felt stronger than anything the town had ever known. Spring's warmth filled the air, coaxing tulips and wild violets from the ground, and laughter returned to the schoolyards, lighter, more joyful, touched by the knowledge that even after the coldest winter, renewal is possible. The Bruno Foundation, a once distant dream, opened its doors at last. The therapy center was built on a small, sunlit plot at the edge of town, surrounded by pastures and flowering hedges. A broad wooden sign marked the entrance, hand-painted by Millbrook students. The Bruno Foundation, where every voice matters. On opening day, the whole community gathered. Teachers, parents, school board members, and dozens of children, some shy and hurting, others bouncing with excitement. They all came to meet the horse whose courage had changed their world. Lily, her hair in neat braids and her cheeks bright with color, led the very first therapy session. She moved confidently now, a far cry from the frightened child who had once hidden behind her mother. She stood at Bruno's side, her hand gentle on his halter, as a group of children, some dealing with trauma, others struggling with anxiety or the silence of grief, formed a quiet circle. Bruno, calm and attentive, lowered his great head to a little boy named Owen, who had barely spoken since his father's death months earlier. Owen hesitated, fingers trembling, then slowly reached up to stroke Bruno's velvet nose. "He's so soft," Owen whispered, his words barely audible, but there. For his mother, watching nearby, it was as if the sun itself had broken through the clouds. Tears spilled down her cheeks. In that small moment, a door to healing had opened. "He listens better than most people," Lily told the group, her voice steady and kind. "If you want to talk or just sit with him, that's okay. He's good at secrets. He helped me find my voice again." Week after week, the foundation blossomed. Children came from neighboring towns, some referred by counselors, others brought by families desperate for hope. Claire managed the center, working late into the evening on grant applications, scheduling therapy sessions, and training a small team of volunteers. Emma and Elijah, now dear friends, were there every step. Emma helping with outreach, Elijah teaching kids how to care for horses and sharing Bruno's story wherever he could. The old wounds in Millbrook healed too. The kids who had once whispered or turned away from Lily now walked beside her, many volunteering at the foundation after school. Savannah, changed by her confession and Lily's forgiveness, became one of the most devoted helpers, never missing a chance to tell newcomers. Sometimes it takes real courage to do the right thing, even when it's hard. One sunny afternoon, the school held an assembly to celebrate the foundation's impact. Principal Rivers stood before the students and community, sharing stories of kids who had learned to speak again, who had made friends for the first time, who had found safety and hope in Bruno's presence. He called Lily and Claire to the stage, alongside Bruno, who bowed as if he understood the importance of the moment. Claire spoke softly but clearly, her words reaching every corner of the auditorium. Bruno taught us all something, not just about bravery, but about listening, really listening to each other's pain and hopes. He reminded us that everyone, even those who can't speak or are afraid to, has a story worth hearing. I hope this foundation keeps that lesson alive for a long time to come. When it was Lily's turn, she took the microphone, her eyes shining. "Bruno saved me twice. The first time was from the pond. The second time, it was from feeling alone. Like I didn't matter. Sometimes people need to be rescued, not just from danger, but from being unseen. Bruno never forgot me, even when everyone else did. Maybe there's someone near you who needs to be seen too. The audience stood, applauding as Lily led Bruno down the steps, children reaching out to touch his mane or whisper thanks. In that moment, it was clear the town had changed, not just because of one act of heroism, but because they'd chosen to learn from it, to build something lasting from their pain and their hope. After the assembly, as dusk settled over Millbrook, Claire and Lily walked Bruno through the pastures, the grass soft beneath their feet, and the sky streaked pink and gold. They paused near the old pond, where it had all begun, and watched the fireflies blink in the reeds. For a long while, they said nothing, just soaking in the peace that now filled the air. Claire finally spoke, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm proud of you, Lily. I'm proud of Bruno. I'm proud of all of us for not giving up." Lily squeezed her mother's hand. "I think Bruno always knew we'd end up here. He never doubted us, even when we doubted ourselves." And so, the story found its gentle ending, not in triumph or spectacle, but in the quiet, steady work of love, work that went on long after the applause faded and the headlines moved on. The Bruno Foundation grew, year by year, a living reminder that the strongest voice in any room could be silent, steady, and waiting for someone to listen. If this story moved you, share it, because sometimes the strongest voice in the room is silent, steady, and has hooves.